if I did not mention that RIoT is a sponsor-driven organization. We have about 85 corporate sponsors that are involved in our ecosystem, providing their time, providing their expertise, and most importantly, perhaps to us, providing their financial assistance so that we can provide educational and business development services at no cost to a very, very broad community. We work across the nation. We produced over 90 events around the United States last year, and we run a wireless test and research lab called the Wireless Research Center in Wake Forest, and a startup accelerator at what we call RIoT Labs in downtown Raleigh. Two of our sponsors in particular, SAS and Smashing Boxes, are participating in today's session, but it is good as you think about the economic situation that a crisis like COVID-19 creates, that these are the kinds of organizations that you see on the screen right now that are supporting entrepreneurs, are supporting small business and large business alike, supporting government as we push through these challenges both in health and in economy. If you are interested in helping to support these communities, by all means, we would love to speak with any that are in attendance that want to be part of this organization. The format for today is that we have two panel discussions that we have lined up. The first panel is going to be focused primarily on prediction and prevention as we think about pandemics and crises. And then the next panel is going to be focused more on response and recovery. But we're expecting that conversation to kind of transition between both of those topics. We're going to start with some moderated discussion. I will be leading a series of questions with our panelists. During the discussion, we want to hear your questions. And there are two ways you can engage. If you are joining this session via your computer and an online link, we have a chat window that others on the RIoT team are monitoring. Feel free to ask questions in that chat window. And then as we close the moderated part of the discussion and open to Q&A, we will read those aloud so that everyone will be able to hear the questions, and we'll get the panelists' perspective and answers to what you've asked. If you are not online, we also will take questions via social media on Twitter. You can hashtag IoT versus COVID-19. That's IoT vs COVID-19 on Twitter, or you can always reach us at NC RIoT. We will be recording today's session and releasing it afterwards as a special edition podcast on the RIoT Underground. We'll provide some information at the very end about where to find that, but essentially any platform where you find your podcast today, you can find RIoT Underground, and we encourage you to subscribe. With that background in order, I'm excited to bring our first panel forward. This discussion over the next about 45 minutes, we want to focus around technology and data, ultimately the Internet of Things, which is the center of where RIoT operates, is about how the whole world is moving towards an economy that's driven by real-time data. How do we collect information? How do we collect data, analyze it, which turns it into information, and then use that information to create real-time, intelligent decision-making, often automated decision-making that enable us to solve really complex, thorny problems like global health situations that we're faced with today. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a brief introduction to themselves, and then we'll dive into Q&A. So Veena, let's start with you, if you wouldn't mind giving a quick introduction of yourself and your organization.
Right, great. Thank you, Tom. My name is Veena Misra. I am a faculty member at NC State University. I also am involved in center activity. I direct the National Science Foundation ASSIST Center. ASSIST is Advanced Self-Powered Systems of Integrated Sensors and Technologies. And in this center, we are working on disruptive wearable devices that enable continuous monitoring of different health parameters and environmental parameters. And we have a large team of people involved at 8 different universities. Looking forward to the panel.
Thank you, Veena. Let's bounce it over to you, Brian.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Bender. I'm calling in from Los Angeles, California, where as of yesterday, we've been instructed to shelter in place. So it's getting pretty rough out here. So I'm excited to be on this panel. Thanks for having me to look at some of the optimism and where tech is going to take us. But I'm a native of North Carolina. I went to North Carolina State, studied materials engineering and worked for the DoD, as well as Corning. Went to UCLA to earn my doctorate in biomedical engineering. Worked briefly in tech transfer to help commercialize technology out of the research labs. And then co-founded a company called Intake Health. We're funded by the NSF and the NIH, and we're a device-enabled digital health company working in the chronic disease management and prevention space. But I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that later.
All right, thank you, Brian. Thanks for being here. Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley Valenti. I'm a senior scientist at Taurus, and I've been in North Carolina since 2009. Did my PhD in computational biology at Duke, and then spent some time there working in data science and infectious disease. And since then I've transitioned to the startup world where I work at Taurus, and Taurus is a data analytics startup company in Durham. And we work on a variety of data science challenges across many disciplines.
All right, thank you for joining, Ashley. And finally, Nick Jordan, let's ask you to introduce yourself, Nick.
Sure. Hey, it's Nick Jordan, CEO of Smashing Boxes. We're a software design and development agency focusing on healthcare, IoT, and blockchain space. I have a before this, I was a part of a healthcare SaaS startup focusing on resource management. And prior to that, I was in finance, actually working for Bloomberg, selling software in tech. Yeah, happy to be here. And I'm right down the street in Durham, and I'm still going to my office because I forced everyone else to shelter in place so that I could sit in my office all by myself in the cleanliness.
Very nice. Similar situation here. RIoT Labs is normally a bustling organization, but I am the lone person in our facility as we record this today. So yeah, glad everyone is taking the advice of the government and social distancing, sheltering in place where mandated, but even where not mandated. That's obviously a big part of how we're going to get through this. So really excited to have a combination of some folks in the entrepreneurial space with new ventures, organization that supports both large enterprises and entrepreneurs in terms of software development and services, and university research as well. Ashley, why don't we start with you? I've already mentioned data a couple of times during the introduction, and as we watch this news cycle, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty right now in the kinds of data and information that's being collected. There's a lot of estimation, there's a lot of hypothesis. Help us understand, in general, how does data, how can that help us prepare or help the healthcare system and the general public to prepare for things like a disease outbreak?
That's a great question, Tom. So I'll start by saying that I think there's always going to be some degree of uncertainty in any data source, especially as the response efforts need to ramp up so quickly. And the ability to combine multiple data sources into a cohesive picture can really go a long way towards reducing this uncertainty. So there's many different data types out there that we can leverage for monitoring an outbreak, which can ultimately be used, that monitoring can ultimately be used to help prepare the healthcare system for an influx of patients. And so in addition to confirmed cases of disease from health authorities like CDC and the World Health Organization, there's data analysis methods that can leverage social media data, web search trends, relevant website article access, and even weather data to give some indication of disease incidence and spread. And so all of these different data sources individually offer information, but as you can imagine, if you take them together, they can provide more insight. And there's many academic groups and data science companies like Taurus who are developing ways to combine all of this data together and monitor outbreaks to potentially provide early detection of disease hotspots. And just one great example of this that I want to point out, there's an academic group called the Delphi Group at Carnegie Mellon, who's been doing this with influenza actually for several years, since 2013. And the CDC runs a Predict the Flu challenge annually. And this group has won this prediction challenge by doing just this, combining multiple data sources to provide a monitoring and prediction platform. And so combining multiple data sources together can really help reduce uncertainty and subsequently improve preparedness.
That's fantastic. Is there a particular data source that is really unexpected that actually has a strong correlation? You know, I guess social media and things like that maybe are non-obvious things where you could see how you could mine really rich information. But is there anything that you've been exposed to that's just a really interesting source of information that you wouldn't think would make sense until it's combined with these other sets of data?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, this does make sense if you think about the biology. This hasn't been for COVID-19, but for influenza in particular, the weather data is I find very interesting. So the temperature and humidity of a given region can really impact how viable a virus remains sort of in the air and on surfaces. And then that can subsequently impact transmission. So I find that pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. So Veena and Brian, you each are working in the data creation, right? Taking this analog world at the edge and turning it into bits of information that we can then analyze and such. Talk to me a little bit. Maybe Brian, we'll start with you first. You know, explain to people what your company does and the kinds of information that you use and kind of its normal use. But then maybe you can also help think about, you know, are there applications of how you collect information that might apply to broader health situations like what we're in now?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'll give a quick background on intake and what we're developing. So we are developing a internet connected urinalysis device. So we test urine, but what's interesting about the way we deploy this is that it's easily attached to a home toilet. So the idea is that as a user, you don't have to change your behavior in any way to collect this data. So it's passive data collection, and we collect that sample, analyze it in real time, and send the data to the cloud. And we're looking for markers of health, chronic disease, and also in the early days, dietary markers. So really getting a granular level of your dietary behaviors and looking how that affects chronic disease prevention and management. And so we're certainly looking at the chronic disease space in the beginning, but it's interesting to think about how this could be applied to pandemics. I mean, even just this year, Fitbit provided a great example. There's some research out of the Scripps Institute published this year that looked at heart rate data, and similar to what Ashley was mentioning, to look at the development and spread of the flu. And so these are really subtle signs, but looking at data at that population level, being able to parse that information out. And I know there's other ways to combine that data, like Ashley was mentioning, probably to enhance that data set. So with urine, I mean, you've got this great biological fluid. So instead of every day when you go flush this data down the drain, to analyze it and look at things like, I could envision dehydration. This is another strong symptom of the flu. Being able to look at that in real time on a broad scale, I can see how you'd be able to potentially predict things like the flu or other non-communicable diseases. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to start collecting this data passively to identify things early and manage it from a top-down perspective.
It's fascinating. It really leads to a thought that right now, a lot of the challenge that has been associated with this particular incident is the lack of testing capability. And if we had this possibility instead to routinely monitor data all the time, to some degree, it invalidates the need for that test if we can come up with other ways to look at information and to develop algorithms and understand what it means, that we're in essence testing ourselves all the time rather than a discrete point in time where we have to go for something specialized.
Absolutely,
Veena,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that, yeah, and so this is sort of this lifestyle behavior, but urine actually as a host, there's other viruses and viral pandemic, things like Zika virus, dengue, other SARS, RNA strands have been shown to exist in urine too. So you can certainly see down the road opportunities to be able to diagnose at a population scale, or at least understand where things are cropping up and where the spread might be happening.
Yeah, very cool. Veena, you're working on something that's truly ambitious, which is to do persistent healthcare monitoring. Talk a little bit about what Assist does and what are some of the challenges associated with continuous data collection?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we are building wearable devices that are powered by the human body, by body heat and body motion, which allows them to always remain on. And this is a paradigm shift because this allows us to get physiological measurements, environmental measurements, even biochemical measurements, basically continuously. And continuously means different things to different people. Continuously doesn't mean you have to measure your glucose levels every second, but regularly during the day, for a long time. Or in the case of ECG, really continuous measurements where you don't miss a single beat. And all of these goals require us to completely rethink the way we build electronics, rethink the way we build sensors, because everything has to be very low power consumption so that we can actually power these devices from the human body, because the power coming from the human body it's sufficient but not very large. So we really have to optimize both sides of the power problem. And it's interesting, a couple of folks already have mentioned this Fitbit study. And even in that study, they talked about a few things that I think connect very well to the kinds of things that we are trying to pursue and others are trying to pursue. First of all, there were some limitations in the Fitbit data. They were monitoring the heart rate and sleep amount, but they weren't sure whether if there was activity or lack of activity, was that really because somebody was sick or were they just being lazy? Also, the stress, the role of stress in causing elevated heart rate is known, but stress could be because the body is fighting infection or there's some other reason for stress. Even in that study coming out of Scripps, they talked about needing continuous sensing for things like temperature and pressure and oxygenation, even coughing, and maybe even some sensors that look at immune response, maybe some of the stuff that Brian's talking about in urine. And the other thing that's, I think, an opportunity here is they were monitoring about 47,000 people here, but they didn't know their baseline. So they didn't know what their baseline was the previous year. So having this long monitoring really. So I think these are some good examples of the kinds of solutions that we work on together and provide people and monitor. I think it's interesting that they mentioned that sleep heart rate is the most sensitive when it comes to infection. You can see the sleep heart rate go up, but maybe the regular heart rate during the day does not get that much affected. So there's some interesting insights as well that maybe, I know it's very early in COVID-19, but maybe in COVID-19, there are some major symptoms that people are talking about, like fever and respiration and shortness of breath, but there's so many unknowns that may not be detectable just with a single measurement, but maybe over time, those things might come out. Anyway, I'll stop now. But I think there are lots of things that we don't know.
That's really, really interesting. So Ashley had mentioned the importance of weather data, and you mentioned environmental monitoring. Do you mean to say that you're looking at I'll call it weather data, but at the individual kind of micro weather level, like what is my environment exactly where I am?
That's right, because a lot of the EPA environmental monitors are stationary and they're few and far between. And this, what we are trying to build here provides access to the environment right where the individual is. So whether it's your temperature, humidity, or noise level, perhaps, or even toxins like ozone and particles, they all are where the person is.
Cool, thank you. So Nick, I want to pull you into the discussion here. You obviously work across a really broad client base. You work lots of IoT and data kinds of projects, but you do have some health background. Can you talk about where you've helped to take an IoT concept from that concept level through to a health solution of some kind, and how do maybe solutions from other markets apply as analogs into healthcare?
Yeah, sure. Right now, it's interesting because you know, being a services firm, we don't have one product to sell into a company. So if you already have a product and it's going to make things better given a current situation, you're selling it hard. What we're seeing on kind of the services side is an identification of new types of needs and kind of an ever evolving like mindset around, or even just ability to identify what is a need, what's a pain point, you know, what's obvious, what's non-obvious. One interesting story is that, you know, 6 months ago when we were working on a project around, you know, IoMT, Internet of Medical Things, a lot of the advice was, you know, innovate outside of the system, you know, because the system, it's hard to integrate into, it's hard to like get buy-in, there's a bureaucracy, so on and so forth. And that seems to be changing, meaning, you know, the system is where there's access to all the customers and patients and people who need help. So we see that there's an opportunity for the opening up of some of these technologies, like, you know, Assist was talking about, where it's like, hey, let's get stuff onto people and keep them away from here and remote monitor them so that they're not potentially coming in when they don't need to, and they're not, you know, coming in and infecting people if they are, you know, having issues. Analog, I mean, it's a pretty, you know, it's obviously is not a good situation whatsoever, but I think it is sort of one that, you know, could be a big driver for change kind of in how the models work and how the businesses of delivering healthcare is contemplated in our market. And frankly, like there's not really a good analog because there's like there's just so much going on with this. I mean, we have seen, you know, with IoT, it's where is the funded project? So, hey, asset tracking, you know, with healthcare, like, yeah, wearables, let's make an app and have data. Now, I think just sort of the order of magnitude of importance has increased. And therefore it's going to go from like nice to have, and I don't know how I'll implement this or I'll integrate this into my, you know, EHR, to I have to have this, otherwise I will be overloaded, we'll be under-resourced, overburdened, and we won't be able to deliver care and we might lose lives. So I think that's not a cool thing to have happen, but it could definitely be a good driver to, you know, encourage organizations, huge and small, to start adopting more tech-focused products into their kind of product and service offering.
I completely agree. I was talking with some people the other day about how this has the same kind of magnitude of feel to me as something like a 9/11, where it not only, you know, was it, you know, a significant point in our history and it affected economic markets and things, but it clearly created a cultural change. And it'll be really interesting to see as we move forward, you know, what are the cultural changes we see. You know, at a minimum, I suspect we're going to see a lot of people washing their hands a lot more often than they used to, and that's probably a good thing. Brian, let's move back to you. Riffing on what Nick said a little bit, your company is helping individuals really to understand in a more clear way their diet and how it impacts their health, and clearly that can drive some behavior change. Do you think that, like, at a population scale, that the same basic principles apply, that if you can create this passive data collection and somehow aggregate it, and we'll get to that in a moment, but that can help to steer societal behaviors and protect societal health? I'm asking you to speculate, I understand, but I'm interested in your perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think since we're starting our focus on the chronic disease side, not the communicable disease side, certainly I think there's some interesting corollaries there. So a lot of this depends on early detection and prevention. You mentioned washing your hands. The best way to stop these things is to get out in front of it early and do your best to try to prevent the spread, especially on a new pandemic where we don't have a vaccine or a treatment in place yet. I mean, on the idea of the chronic disease management side, you can imagine these things develop slowly. You know, they're called silent killers, like chronic kidney disease. Most people don't go around thinking about testing it when they're not feeling it, when they're not walking around in pain, despite the fact 90% of people with early stage CKD don't know they have it. And so if more individuals were able to get out in front of that, understand if they have that disease, and start managing conditions and lifestyle behaviors early, it significantly reduces their own personal health in a positive way going forward, but also from a systems level. So the healthcare system costs can go down in aggregate. And so I think once you start scaling this beyond the individual, that's where you start to see it on the chronic disease side. Certainly on the pandemic side, that's where I think there's some interesting corollaries. If you get out in front early, as we see now, this lack of testing is one of the biggest problems. Not knowing who has it early leads to increased spread and an inability to really allocate what at the end of the day is limited resources in a smart way to try to prevent this thing from spreading. And so in both cases, it's really trying to get out in front early. And so in that sense, I think passive testing plays a big role in that. I think being able to do it without burdening the individual is huge. And so, yeah, I think we'll see more and more passive testing systems come online to help, track things early as soon as they start to come online, but as well as like reprisals of past diseases in current pandemic. So all this together, I think, is going to increase our understanding of how to better allocate these resources in the future.
Yeah, and I actually think we should not be dismissing the importance of things like chronic disease measurement and monitoring and prevention in a situation like this. There have been lots and lots of media attention around what exponential systems look like and how fast this is growing and things, and maybe not as much reminder that from a fatality point of view, the real force multiplier is the combination of contracting COVID-19 and having some other health issue like a respiratory disease like an asthma or something.
Yeah.
Really all of this comes together, and removing those force multipliers lessens the impact of a communicable disease.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So super. So Ashley, let's come back to you. It's easy to say, hey, we're going to collect all this information and we're going to do a little bit of math and we're going to come out with some great outcomes on the back end or some intelligence, but it's really not that simple. Can you help us to understand a little bit more about system integration and what are the challenges to apply what we could do into things as complex as healthcare systems, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, as there's technical challenges in data science, as there are in any technical discipline. But looking past those and looking past the immediate challenges of COVID-19, data analysis has been making a positive impact in medical decision-making and many other disciplines for centuries. And as these analysis methods become more and more sophisticated, one of the really big challenges can actually be to translate and leverage these approaches to change standard practice in fields as complex as medicine, especially where the human element is so important. And it's certainly possible that, as Nick mentioned, that this situation will help overcome some of this and sort of push things to move faster. But as you might imagine, it's not going to be as simple as installing some plugins to an electronic medical record and show some clinicians some numbers and fancy plots. So in order to modify standard practice, the practice of extraordinarily skilled professionals, there's always going to need to be evidence that the modification is an improvement, of course, and just as importantly, there needs to be an understanding of or trust in the rationale behind those modifications. So explainable artificial intelligence approaches, which are exactly what they sound like, really go a long way towards overcoming these translation challenges. And they do so by focusing on approaches that are readily interpretable. So this allows a subject matter expert to review a machine-derived decision process and then leverage these processes to make their work more efficient or more effective. And so this sort of removing black box approaches can certainly help with this translation challenge, which I see as one of the biggest challenges.
Interesting. Thank you for that. I guess it strikes me a little bit of what you said around how do you really demonstrate and explain to a community, particularly these trained professionals, that there are new approaches, there's new information, there's new things, and show enough data or evidence that actually they work to adopt things that are new. Veena, you lead university research lab, but do a lot of collaboration directly with industry and with government to develop out and and publish the papers and the that kind of verified evidence. Talk a little bit about how that collaboration works. And there's lots of organizations out there that are trying to figure out what should I do, how can I help, like what are some ideas and ways to engage.
Yeah, and by the way, great points everybody's making here. We are very much dependent on our collaborations with industry because they give us the reality check of what devices make sense, what the reliability needs to be. And so from that point of view, we have an industry team that we work with where they are engaged in our different research projects, whether it's for sudden cardiac arrest or whether it's for diabetes or wound monitoring. And we have teams of industry members and clinicians who work with us closely in making sure these devices are actually going to be used and actually are reliable. I think an interesting dimension that's coming up here with pandemics. I'm having a little bit of echo. Tom, can you hear me?
Yep, now the echo seems to have resolved. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so an interesting dimension that's coming up with the pandemics, like the ones here, are this opportunity to monitor so many people who may have been infected, who are quarantining themselves, who are may have the infection but are not showing any symptoms. All of these kinds of individuals would perhaps benefit significantly from some remote monitoring. And also the doctors would benefit from that, the public health responders would benefit from that, but that requires that everybody be able to afford something like this. I think in the Fitbit study, and even Apple has come out with its own version recently on the sleep heart rate for COVID-19. These are all expensive devices, and if industry can help get the cost of these down, I think that would be something that would be quite useful, especially concerning large numbers of people. Those are some initial thoughts.
Okay, cool. No, appreciate that. And obviously, all of these things are works in progress as we move forward and figure out the best ways to collaborate. Nick, I'm going to ask you kind of a similar question from the industry side. How do you bring organizations together? And maybe you could share a little bit about this new venture studio concept that you've launched and how that might accelerate getting solutions into the market faster.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, kind of what you said about 9/11 is maybe how I feel right now, at least in today. I mean, I was kind of feeling different a week ago, and who knows how I'll feel next week. So, I mean, in general, in the world as we used to know it, it was having conversations, it was talking to people and thought leaders inside of big institutions, small ones. It was working with groups like RIoT, like Assist, and just saying, and trying to find ways to solve people's problems in a way that they are ready to engage with. Like they can, like when I had a SaaS company in healthcare that helped with resource management, like roles by location, et cetera. And it totally failed and bombed because like no one knows how to buy anything. And this was like 10 years ago. It's like, okay, cool. Like, I product market fitted this, I customer demoed it, I tested it, I refined it, launched, and I was like, can you buy this? Give me your credit card. They're like, oh, I don't know who buys anything. So little stuff like that is one of the big blockers in healthcare. So that's starting to change. With the Venture Studio, it would be, helping leverage these connections and these resources with our ability to advise and help and enable tech startups with our actual capabilities in our organization around design, product, human-centered design, product thinking, engineering. In post-COVID world, I'm not entirely sure. I think there could be, the 9/11 analogy I think is accurate because like there could be a wholesale wave of, it could be mandated to share your data. And I'm not saying I'm all for like government controls everything or anything like that, but I mean, I'm saying like people do what they want with it. They can choose to hoard it. They can choose to not be an open system. They can choose to not communicate or be interoperability has been a big word in healthcare for like, I don't know, 10 years or way more, probably forever. And it's still not solved. So that's where innovative companies have a hard time getting in if they can't solve some of these basic fundamental problems that are could be mandatorily unblocked, which if that's the case, there's going to be a whole new wave of opportunities that then can be activated and can be realized and value that can be driven. So, I mean, that's not a good answer. I'm sort of like, it's a big run on sentence, but like there is definitely a, you know, if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I'd have one answer and this would be kind of like a fun little convo. If you ask me today, I'm kind of like, I don't know the answer, but we might see big sweeping changes that then do create great opportunities to drive impact, improve outcomes, and create a better healthcare like system and experience using technology. As of right now, it's hard to say exactly what all those changes will be, but we're, you know, as we navigate this moment in time, you know, we just got to stay tuned and be ready to act.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. There's an awful lot of uncertainty. I want to remind the audience that if you have questions, please submit them either via chat window or over Twitter on social media at the hashtag IoT versus COVID-19. As we kind of move towards that section, you bring a really interesting point forward, Nick, in this question that we deal with all the time in the IoT space under generally less serious conditions, but still important. You know, what is the role of privacy in all of this data? I've always said that data security is a technical challenge. Data privacy is a business decision, or when you start talking about mandating things, government regulation type of decision. Our market, for whatever reason, as consumers, we are very, very glib, I don't know if that's the right word, at yes, big corporate, you know, Google, Facebook, whoever, here's all my data, but we're very, very protective of sharing data with the government. And I'll open this to any of the panel, what do you anticipate might change, or what do you think should change, if anything, in enabling more data collection for the public health? And at what point, though, do we still need to make sure, you know, to protect our own freedoms, that we're protecting privacy? I know that's a really difficult question.
Well, I think I'll take one quick stab at it. I mean, I think, you know, the government went as far as to put in place HIPAA, which is to make sure you don't share people's data without them knowing, not even without them knowing. First of all, I'm not a lawyer or a legislator, but basically they went as far as to have some thinking about data. And I think it's one of those where it just takes a little bit of education, because when you're writing code and you're thinking about HIPAA protection and other compliance, you know, you're doing a lot to make that secure and to stay compliant. You're de-identifying it, you're encrypting it, then you're, you know, then you're encrypting it later at a different source. You're just making different moves. Well, if we can, like, you know, de-identify people, and if we can sort of disaggregate certain pieces of the data, I don't know why there couldn't be more areas where there's shared secure data that is in no way, shape, or form identifying to people, so that for the use of the greater good, for innovation, for trends, for, you know, issue tracking or artificial intelligence, and, you know, saying, ooh, this is a trend that looks like over in this area we're gonna have this issue here, or hey, based on all this, we know that this sort of solution will work. So I think, I guess to restate maybe what could be possible would be better education sort of at the regulatory level of what's actually possible in a way that's doesn't take data away from people. It doesn't like put everyone's literally personal data in the hands of the government, and it doesn't put all healthcare institutions at odds with each other or with their customer if they're trying to like wrangle their record back and forth of who owns it and whose asset is this. I think there's way more to that conversation. And all those points I just said are completely subjective and debatable, and I would debate both sides of many of them. So, I mean, that's just sort of a starting point of the convo here today, but I think there's definitely a lot we can do to make this a better situation around data.
Yeah, and, you know, I think what's kind of interesting, you were mentioning whether corporations have the data or whether the government has the data. I mean, this is a rapidly evolving area where, you know, you see Amazon and you see Google and you see all these tech companies now getting into data. And they've, you know, Facebook's had privacy breaches, and so there's obviously concern there too. But I mean, you look at like 23andMe, and the vast majority of those people who use that service do offer up their genetic data for research purposes. And so it definitely seems like it depends on the use case, and there has to be trust from the consumer of that is how it's going to be used. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see how big tech handles the data as well as they get into health.
Yeah, there's always a balance between your trust with your customers and your audience, which is incredibly important to business success, but then also value creation, right? And we have seen that when there's value that's created, people are willing to share a little bit more, and coming through a situation like this would be interesting to see where things go from there. I do not have a view of the chat window myself. I understand there's a lot of comments that are coming in, which is fantastic. If there are questions, we'll address those. If you have other questions, comments also about future sessions and things, feel free to submit those. While we still have the panel, one question I'd like to throw out is, Ashley, you talked about the importance of bringing disparate data sets together and looking at them in kind of fresh ways, and it unlocks hidden insights. Are there any data streams that any of you are either working on now to bring to bear that don't exist, that might be useful, or data streams that you kind of wish that you had, because with this particular data you might be able to solve a new problem? What is the data that we need that we don't have yet? And please, as you answer, let the audience know who you are so they know which person has answered.
I can just jump in quickly and say that in Assist, this is Veena, in Assist, we are getting data with our clinical collaborators, and we are making that data available in a database that can perhaps catalyze more algorithms and things like that. But these are clinical human subject data on different physiological sensors that we're collecting. So if you'd like to learn more, let me know.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too. This is Brian at Intake, and since one of the things we're looking at is dietary quality as one of the biggest drivers of most chronic diseases today, and so that sort of real-time longitudinal data on an individual of how their diet is progressing on a quantitative level, it doesn't really exist. So it is introducing some new aspect of that granular level of diet. But, as most chronic diseases, there's a long list of risk factors there. So there will be interesting ways to try to combine that with things like sleep and stress, and these other things to really get a better holistic picture of health, both for tracking pandemics as well as chronic diseases, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Nick, did you have something to add?
Sure, I'd love to do a whole nother panel on this. It'd be great because everyone's got some awesome insights. What we're doing, this is Nick at Smashing Boxes, is working with certain groups on sort of the institution and state level to find ways to do data aggregation. So I guess my big kind of thing, what's right now is data aggregation. Can you parse away some things that don't matter and collect other things that do matter, and then put these into some shared, equivalent of middleware of software where we can get it, we can sanitize it, and we can get it, actionable. And just as a step, that's, more than just a scope of work or me, had an idea. That takes a lot of coordination. So we're just one part of many of those conversations. But I think, data, working with the groups that normally might not collaborate to collaborate on the best way to do data aggregation so that you can run a lot of stuff. And I'm even, to Brian's point, I'm like, well, that's just right now, but how do we start to get all these other inputs on a consistent and ongoing basis to drive ultimately better outcomes? But yeah, that's what we're seeing and working on right now.
Cool, thank you. Any last comments from you, Ashley?
I'm just going to say, as the greedy and curious data scientist in me, I would echo all of the above. But yes, at Taurus, we're doing essentially just what we talked about, is trying to combine multiple data sources to see what insights we can gain, and working with a variety of partners, data ingest partners, clinical partners, and pretty much any type of data we can leverage to see what insights we can pull out of it is what we're interested in.
Okay, great. Caroline, I'm going to go to you from the RIoT team. Do we have any questions online to address before we wrap up this panel?
Hey, thanks, Tom. We do have one question from Wiser Systems on Twitter. How often are solution providers coming forward first to solve problems? And how regularly do end users or administrators in healthcare bring their own problems forward looking for solutions? That's directed to any of the panelists.
Sorry.
I can comment here. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was Nick. Mine's not going to be that great, but I can just say that I don't have visibility into how often the
You're going to eat in here.
administrators comment, could bring their own problems, except for when we're working directly with organizations. So in some of our organizations, I've been on the phone regularly with them for the last couple of weeks, and we're solving problems each day, and each day it's a new problem. So now it's like, how do we install communication when our workers have to then be at home and they still have to communicate with their patients, and they didn't necessarily have a work remote and access all your tools solution in place. So we've seen in certain in the healthcare industry with certain companies and institutions that they're very active in engaging the feedback of their team, and it's on a case-by-case basis, because I'm also not like a receiver of just problem statements from anyone and everyone. So I'd be interested to hear other answers on that as well. But that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a thought there too. It's just one way to think about these top-down problems, just from my perspective, because we are grant funded. Some of these larger institutions do present these problems that they see, and they're often larger scale health problems, and those are a good way to get an idea of, I guess, what overarching problems exist in the system. But we're recent recipients of an NIH grant called the I-Core program. And I think it's, for those who don't know, it's really just trying to get out there and interview and find out customer segments and find problems out there. And so we're with 20 some teams that are all in the healthcare space and spend every day going into the healthcare systems, talking to doctors, talking to different areas of the healthcare system to identify those problems. And sometimes it's pulling out those problems from the system itself. So they're out there. Some come top down, but a lot of times it's people just going into the system and finding what's not working right and figuring out how to solve it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say that it's really a push-pull thing going on all the time. You need some push if you're developing technologies to even start the conversation sometimes. But then when you meet with the customers or the clinicians or whoever's going to use the technology, so many more new ideas come out. So I think it's really a opportunity for these two worlds to communicate frequently.
Thank you. Caroline, I think we have time for one more audience question.
Thanks, Tom. This one is from Steve Kane. I see that you're using GoToMeeting for today's virtual event. As more and more events are going virtual over the next few months at least, does the panel have an opinion on what's the best / most cost-effective platform to use going forward?
I'll jump in. If anybody on the panel has an opinion, we'd love to hear. But at RIoT, we're actually actively researching that now, and we'll be happy to follow up as we launch this episode onto the RIoT Underground. We can also on our site kind of publish out what we found. I have heard discussions about quote breaking the internet as more and more things go online, but I haven't seen any evidence of that yet. So yeah, if any on the panel have any insider background, we'd love to hear from you. But otherwise, we'll take that as an action item from RIoT.
Yeah, at this point, I think I've probably tried every one. It feels like I do know. I was on a pretty large WebEx conference. It's probably at least 80 to 100 people, and that did not go so well. So it can definitely break if you reach that threshold.
There's also a big difference between a meeting tool like a GoToMeeting, which we're using here, and truly like a webinar tool, which we're exploring. So we'll also make sure to push that distinction out as we provide that answer later on. We're in some pretty deep discussions with Cisco right now, who is one of our RIoT partners, on leveraging some of their tools. So this is going to become a regular series for us, and hopefully as we go forward, we'll have more and more functionality to share with the audience and higher quality. But at least for this session, it appears everything's going well. So panel, I want to wrap this session up so that we can start the next session on time. I'll ask one final question. I'll ask kind of for this is kind of a lightning round, quick answer. And Veena, we'll start with you. But indications, unfortunately, indications are that the current COVID-19 situation is going to get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. As a technologist, all of us on this panel, I believe, would identify themselves as technologists. What really has you most optimistic about the future, and particularly how technology and data are going to play?
Yeah, I think that what has me very interested is the fact that there is so much that technology can help understand in terms of both what the role of chronic diseases is and what the progression is for different individuals and why. Why do some people get it and have no symptoms, whereas other people get it and they have horrible symptoms? I think technology can really play a role here. So I am looking forward to helping with that.
Great, thank you. Brian, let's go to you next.
Yeah, no, thanks, Veena. I think that personalization is really going to be an interesting space in the future. But yeah, I think it's, if nothing else, bringing health top of mind. It's understanding how valuable early diagnostics is. And I think more remote monitoring tools, IoT solutions, are a fantastic way to try to address that in the future. So I think that's going to be a good path moving forward.
All right, thank you. Ashley?
Absolutely. So I would say that this situation is bringing together so many talented professionals who might not otherwise work together. So because everyone is impacted by this outbreak and is asking themselves what they can do to help both personally and professionally, it's uplifting to see rapid collaboration efforts spin up. And I think that these relationships will have an important impact on this situation and in the future.
Yep. All right, thank you. And Nick, let's close it out with you.
Sure. Thanks for having us. Great to be here. I think it's everything everyone else said, and also this is going to be a big push to move to value-based care as a business model from fee-based care. And when you move to value-based care, there is an economic incentive to implement some of the technology that we're speaking of, and to have some data and have access to more data through remote sensing, shared databases, algorithms, data scientists, et cetera. So I think, yeah, like I said, I'm optimistic that this will drive some really important change in the system, and just got to get through it first and then move on and bigger and better things.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds like a future topic for this session all by itself. So appreciate that. Appreciate the comments from all of you. I apologize that on a platform like this, you don't get the huge round of applause that you deserve, but thanks to all the panelists for joining in this first session. We'll let you each go ahead and mute yourselves, and we'll invite our next set of panelists to join. While they are doing that, I want to remind people that we will push out all of this content via the RIoT Underground. We'll record that. We'll try and follow up on some of the audience questions with additional information on our blog and on our website. But heard some really, I think, key takeaways from this first discussion, that massive data collection is now possible. We certainly have data that we want to get from new places that we don't have, but there is an awful lot of data that's available, and there's incredibly interesting new information coming through the efforts of folks like Assist and through companies like Intake, the ability to quickly build tools through companies like Smashing Boxes and the expertise they have to kind of build the framework that can use this data, and then the analytics that a company like Taurus can do to drive systems. But ultimately, that our greatest value, it sounds like, comes from systems of data, where we have, for example, weather system data and health system data and social media information, and how all of these things come together, and that drives the ability to solve problems, but also drives new business models, as Nick mentioned kind of at the end of the program. So a lot of really great takeaways from that discussion. Thanks again to that panel. And at this point, I'd like to invite our other panelists for the second discussion, this time more focused on response and recovery, to go ahead and join us on this RIoT podcast. So quick sound check. I'm going to ask Steve, are you online? Steve Bennett? We'll give Steve a moment while we're waiting on him. Emil, are you online? What about Michael Levy?
Hey, Tom, this is Steve Bennett. Can you hear me now?
Hey, I can hear you, Steve. Fantastic.
Yeah,
I think
Help set my
automatically
mute off. Apologize.
everyone. Yeah, thanks. I should have told all of the panelists that we master muted everyone to try and get a clean audio recording and not have feedback from the audience. So thanks for figuring that out on your own. But for the rest of the panelists, Michael, are you there? Maybe still looking for the button. How about Manal?
Yeah, Manala's here.
Manal, great to have you. And Neil, are you on as well? Confirmation online from my team that a couple of folks are on, so we'll give them just a moment to get themselves unmuted and then we'll begin. I appreciate the audience hanging with us as what we're very comfortable with of in-person sessions and hosting and meetings and face-to-face interaction in this new virtual world. It'll be very interesting to see what new habits we develop and how they stick as we move forward. Again, Michael or Emil, have you been able to get yourself connected? All right, Caroline, I'm going to ask you maybe in the background to see if you can't reach out to each of them and solve some of the technical challenges, but I'd like to go ahead and get started with the folks that are here. Is that all right?
That's
Fine
great.
for my end.
Hey everyone, hey Tom, Michael here. I was having trouble with the voice over IP, so I'm dialed in now to the self portion.
Great, glad to have you, Michael.
Yeah, glad to be here. I'm gonna mute the.
All right, so while we give another moment for Emil, I'll frame this discussion. We've just had a discussion that largely centered on collection of information and large-scale analytics and new sources of data that maybe we didn't have just a few years ago, and how those things can lead to the prediction and ultimately the hope is prevention of pandemics. How can we more manage our health in real time and see things as they're starting to get bad and then intervene before it gets bad? But of course, there are some situations where we get beyond that point. And while we still don't want to lose focus on prediction and prevention techniques, we also want to really efficiently respond and then recover and think about how do we learn from situations that we're going through so that then the next time around we're better prepared and so on. So the recovery and the response and the prediction and prevention create a virtuous circle over time as long as we're continually gaining information, gaining knowledge, sharing that, feeding it forward, and continuing to improve and to optimize. So as we start this off, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a quick introduction of themselves. And Steve Bennett, let's start with you. If you'll let the audience know who you are and a little bit about your role and your organization.
Sure, you bet. Again, Steve Bennett. I am the director of our global public sector and government practice at SAS. So again, we help provide analytics to governments around the world at all levels, state, local, federal, to try to help them make sense of their data and put that data to work for the citizens that they serve. Prior to my time at SAS, really all the time prior to that, for 12 years, I spent inside the U.S. Department of Homeland Security immediately after the events of September 11th. My last job at Homeland Security was the director of national biosurveillance. And so we tracked and led response for events like the Ebola crisis, MERS coronavirus out of the Middle East a few years ago, Zika, and things of that nature. So sadly, a lot of the things that we were worried about, we're starting to see, show up. From an academic background, I have a PhD in computational biology from Stanford and backgrounds in biology and chemistry from Caltech prior to that. And thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here today.
Thank you very much. I think you have background as Ashley had from our first panel, and I didn't realize that put together that you were a couple of doctors in computational biology. So fantastic.
Well, as my wife tells me, I'm a doctor, but not the kind that can help anybody. So happy to lend what I can.
Well, you're going to be a great help today, so thank you for being here. Michael, let's jump down to you. And you may be muted. All right, while we wait on Michael to get...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we got you.
Okay. Sorry about that. I was muted on the computer, but not on the phone, so I didn't realize they were tied together so closely. There you go. Learn something new every day. Hi, everyone. Michael Levy, president and co-founder of the Digital Health Institute for Transformation. It's an organization focused on connecting the disparate partners and collaborators across the marketplace to really focus on the community needs of our people across North Carolina and beyond, organizing platforms, devices, information streams to service the individual across their determinants of health, and have been obviously connected to RIoT here since the beginning and formation of our organization. So a great partner in RIoT, and happy to be here. My background is in clinical operations within large academic medical centers and digital health entrepreneurialism, and have historically and current seen our major gap, not in talent and not in technology, but in the systems that connect these talents and technologies to the need and the true need in the system. So, and that's oriented around the individual and the community in which they live in. And we'll get more into that later. Thanks, Tom.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for being here. Manal, let's move over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. I'm Manal Ramley, and I have experience in large enterprise solutions, particularly focused on automation and integration of systems, and that's data, analysis, and communication. My experience is I'm on the executive and on the board of NewsCo, which is a communication intelligence platform, and it's really part of a suite of tools for organizations to execute their communication strategy, and it creates targeted, personalized messaging using monitors to cultivate feelings of community and bigger than selves for organizations. Also have experience in the board of ZE Power Group and this enterprise data management solution. A lot what Nick was talking about, the automation, data collection, validation, analysis. This is what ZE does, and I have experience in how valuable that is to large organizations. Also on a community level, I'm on the board of Durham Nativity School. Really appreciate RIoT, really appreciate you, Tom, for pulling this together and giving NewsCo and ZE the opportunity to be part of this larger community and just really speaking about things that are relevant in technology and innovation.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. And I'm just realizing as I look, I'm sorry we have your name misspelled on the slide, but we will get that corrected. It's Manal Ramley. Yeah, thanks for being here and for lending your expertise. Just quick check, has Emil been able to join? All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward. Hopefully he can join, but I'll provide a little bit of background about him in a moment. He may have gotten pulled into some higher priority things as he is very much in the center of helping to organize data and research and efforts that are specifically fighting this crisis in real time. All right, so Steve, let's start with you. The first conversation that was had today really centered on data, and there is perhaps no stronger organization at organizing, analyzing, and understanding data than SAS. There are a number of different applications I know that SAS is involved in public health and other types of data. Maybe you could provide an example of how information can speed the response. I know, for example, that you've done a lot of work and research in the vaccine space.
Yeah, so the goal, once we're out of the first panel, which is try to stop it, and we're into this panel, which is how do we deal with it, you're really trying to get speed to treatment as fast as you can. And when you've got a new threat like this kind of a coronavirus, as we all know, antibiotics don't work because it's a virus. We all come and follow the news for that. So the challenge is, can we get antivirals created, or the holy grail, ultimately vaccine created as quickly as possible while we do other things to figure out how we can deal with the response. So if you think about the whole end-to-end approach for a response to something like this, once you have it running around in the community, you want to be able to leverage data to assess the effectiveness of different mitigation strategies, so that from a policymaking perspective, Tom, I know you asked about public health, but first, from a policy perspective, our government leaders have to make hard decisions about which sorts of mitigation alternatives to recommend. Do we do full stay at home? Do we do social distancing? What do we recommend? And understanding data about effectiveness of those alternatives and using analytics to understand the potential benefits and costs of those is critical to helping make better decisions. So you want to be as evidence-driven on the mitigation side as possible. But separate from that, you want to be pursuing the public health aspects as well and the pharmaceutical aspects. There's a lot of examples where SAS has supported this, and not just SAS, it's the whole scientific and technical community. We've been part of, just on the cancer side, we've been part of the CEO Roundtable on Cancer for about 19 years. And sometimes just pulling together data can allow new discoveries to come out much more quickly. So this CEO Roundtable on Cancer has produced something called Project Datasphere, which hosts clinical trial data from cancer treatments and trials from many, many different stakeholders, multiple companies, hospitals, patient data, all brought together in one place. And when you do that, you can find things faster that you wouldn't have expected. One of the key things that came out of that, that certain classes of statin drugs that treat cholesterol turns out to have some partial benefit on stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So things that you didn't know you would find unless you put all these different data sets together. So hosting that data in one place and connecting data together for collaboration can go a long way towards speeding the innovation cycle. So that's a big piece of it. The second is new and innovative platforms for building vaccines faster than we've done it before. If you watch the news, you see people talking about how it used to take us 10 years to get to a vaccine. And the way that we scale up vaccines is terrifyingly old school. It is trays of chicken eggs. It is all kinds of very old-fashioned scale-up methods. So the use of technology to help speed these things up, both the discovery of a potential new vaccine, and then once we've got one, how do we scale it quickly? Those are areas where we are working with our pharmaceutical partners around the world to help them put their data to work in those areas.
That's fantastic. We talked about lots of types of data that are used as we think about this prediction and prevention. How much overlap is it between those data sets and the data sets that you need as you look at the recovery and the response activities? Is there a lot of overlap, or is it, well, now you really need to get into completely different kinds of information?
Well, I think I'll give you the very definitive yes and no. And I think there is an overlap in the sense that from a response perspective, what you want to do, even when you've got community spread of a virus like this, you want to be able to track where you think you're seeing higher versus lower activities in certain communities so that you can take action. And so some of the outstanding examples that I think it was Ashley gave on the last panel around disparate data sets like weather, social media data, other sorts of data sets that can help you, using advanced analytics like AI, can help you identify where you see the outbreak spreading, changing, and moving. Things like weather can help you get a handle on some of that. So those are data sets that can help give you a better idea of where you want to apply your very limited resources. So in some sense, there is an overlap of data from the prediction prevention side and the response and tracking side. But when you get into the pharmaceutical development piece, it gets pretty specific. That work out of Australia last year that created the very first fully AI developed vaccine, that kind of data gets very, very specific around combinatorial chemistry and how do we find the right molecule to do what we want when we inject it into a person. So a little bit of yes, a little bit of no.
Yeah, cool. Fair enough.
Tom, this is Emil. Can you hear me?
Hey, Emil, great. Sorry that there were a little technical difficulties getting you in, but we're glad to have you on. So if you would, please just give a quick introduction.
Sure. Apologies for that. Thank you very much, Tom and RIoT, for everything that you're doing to go ahead and advance the conversation in the region. A little bit about First Flight. We're a nonprofit business incubator in RTP, typically anywhere between 30 and 40 early stage science-based companies. My position happens to be funded by BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, and I look forward to going ahead and talking about the funding opportunities and partnership opportunities that BARDA has specifically around COVID-19 when we get to a question that focuses on me.
All right. Thank you for joining, Emma. We'll loop you into the discussion here just in a moment. First, I'd like to go over to Michael. We heard about some of the things from Steve a moment ago in terms of how you can leverage kind of massive big data analytics to solve really thorny problems. You're working with large industry, but also frequently you're working at like an individual project scale or an entrepreneur scale, working with young companies. What are some creative things that you're seeing in the DHIT community?
Yeah, well, I think, as it relates to engagement at the individual level, engagement with the system level, how we communicate, how we drive, connectivity. It's kind of, our moment, if you will, to shine, albeit a really somber moment. But as chatbot technologies, as remote patient monitoring technologies have been, slow to find their way into mainstream and slow into, the cultural, norm of our systems and our individual, kind of adoption, we're seeing this, immediately become front and center, right? The number of chatbots that are here to service individuals around symptom checks and triage to evaluate whether COVID is present or not is tremendous, and the number of devices that are at our fingertips now that collect those critical data streams, to evaluate the presence of infection. It's here, and I think what we're going to be seeing, and we're already seeing it within a week of this pandemic, but we're going to see probably most notably is the culture transformation that reaches us in popular demand as it relates to a virtual, a data driven, a AI driven healthcare system, and that's for our entrepreneurs and our small startups and our industry that are producing these really transformative health tools to rise and serve, while our current historical human-driven healthcare system today is really on the front lines battling the infection real time. We don't know what that's going to play out to be like in respects to manpower or person power, the ability for materials and supplies at the bedside, et cetera, over the many months. So this is really almost a call to action and a call to arms for our community to step up and respond accordingly, and not replace, not disrupt, but augment our healthcare system in the moment of time of need.
So I think it's really interesting, both the term, the call to arms, and then this augmentation. I thought it was really important to bring into a discussion like this a voice that's not involved in healthcare at all. And I'm looking at you, Manal, across the virtual screen here. When we run the RIoT Accelerator, where we work with teams, we think it's really important as we bring startups together and work with them that we have startups from a bunch of different industries, because they learn from each other and technologies kind of apply horizontally across different use cases, and there's different analogs and things. But fundamentally, NewsCo really is an information dissemination company. Those are my terms. You can disagree with me, but data, we've talked a lot about data, and then analytics creates information. You're involved in the dissemination of information, and it strikes me this is an enterprise use case that you might not have thought of specifically, but help our audience understand a little bit about what NewsCo does and what is the role of, say, enterprise communication as it relates to a pandemic like this.
That's fantastic. And while Michael was speaking, you talked about human-driven, Tom, and you talked about augment. What I also, you referred to call to arms and augmented. Sorry, I sort of captured the human-driven, that sort of term that he brought up. And for me, that speaks human-driven, augmentation. It's all about communication. How do you communicate? How do you communicate in an enterprise way when there's so many different audience and so many different stakeholders and so many different locations, geography? COVID-19 has demonstrated how communication is critical, and not just, it's also a lot of natural disasters, floodings, hurricanes, and other severe weather patterns. It's how do I disseminate my information in a personalized, relevant way to cultivate safety, reassurance, inform, and educate in a corporate, responsible, and centric way, rather than the fear and misinformation that's really rampant. And how do enterprises do it in a way that's nimble, that's automated, that's integrated? And earlier in the first panel, you and Veena discussed ambient temperatures and humidity, and that unless you're capturing it relevant to me rather than outside of my area, then it's not relevant. So with NewsCo, we allow organizations to personalize messages, KPI information that's relevant to your stakeholders, your employers, your customers, your executives. And that's all of the information that we talked about in the first panel, whether it's weather, whether it's KPIs, whether it's end of day processes. What are relevant for me, for my business, for my employees, for my customers, for my executives, and how do I communicate that in a centric way to my audience? And that really is what NewsCo does. We're part of a portfolio of solutions that allows the enterprise to communicate in a personalized, relevant way to reassure, and real-time, automated, centralized, and integrated are the key components.
Cool. Thank you for that. And for those that aren't as familiar with NewsCo, they really facilitate this through taking every screen in your establishment and curating in real time the exact information that needs to be on that screen, whether that's internal employee communications or external kind of customer communication. So yeah, thanks for that background.
Perfect. Tom, can I just add also, because we were speaking to one of our large automotive manufacturing clients today and yesterday and trying to help them streamline their communication. It's also about how do we integrate all the different tools that they're using, whether it's their apps that are for their clients or their social media. And how do you create one, homogeneous way for communication to start and be circular for them as well?
Yeah, and that's really important for an auto manufacturer, for example, that doesn't have as easy a way to say, well, please just go work from home. But they need to truly communicate real-time information to their employees about what they need to do to stay safe. So thanks for that. Emil, I want to move over to you. You, in a lot of ways, are really an information aggregator. Helping people that have ideas in this call to arms, whether they're actually medical researchers or they're others that just have creative ideas and opportunities, to help them to figure out how do they interconnect into the greater solution system, if you will. Talk a little bit about kind of, how you facilitate that, what you're trying to connect, what your objectives are, and how people might leverage some of the work you're doing at First Flight.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tom. A couple of things. First of all, BARDA happens to be one of the funding entities from the federal government, specifically around COVID-19. So if you happen to be in the diagnostics, vaccines, therapeutics, ventilators, advanced manufacturing technology spaces, or others, then there are funding opportunities, for example, around those specific areas. If those don't happen to be the areas, or if as you're looking at those funding opportunities, you don't fit into one of those specifically, they happen to have a program called Tech Watch where you can possibly set up a call to, it'll be a virtual call at this point in time to go ahead and see how you can possibly have your solutions that plug in. Admittedly, they have a lot of requests for that right now. However, there are opportunities, if yours is kind of coming in at the top of the pile, then they're looking for ways to go ahead and move that forward. One of the easiest ways to go ahead and engage with BARDA early on is you can reach out to me. Again, my email address is on the screen, but it's erunge@ffvcnc.org, as in First Flight Venture Center, North Carolina.org. And you can shoot me a question and I can see what I can possibly do to see what the federal funding opportunities are for you to go ahead and help plug into there. So those are a couple of things that we're specifically doing to try and connect folks from, say, the Triangle and the North Carolina ecosystem into these federal funding opportunities to try and tackle COVID-19.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. I know we've had a number of people that have reached out to RIoT, asking how can they get involved, and I think they're not even thinking about the funding piece. They're just thinking of, how do I do something that's useful that isn't distracting or pulling people away from more important efforts. And so the fact that there's even potential for funding behind it is absolutely fantastic. And so I'll encourage our audience to reach out to you with any ideas that they may have. I'll remind the audience that as we move forward, we are going to take some questions from the audience. You can submit them via the chat window on the webinar or over social media at #IoT versus COVID-19. Steve, I want to come back to you. It's interesting, you have this background where you've been involved in this space now for quite some time, and for part of your career from the government side and now from the industry side. And we've talked a lot about collaboration, public-private partnerships. Can you give some perspective in the difference of approach, from I guess one side of that partnership versus the other?
Sure. I mean, obviously, well, I wouldn't say obviously. My perspective is largely, at steady state, government will move much more slowly than private sector will, and that's for a whole bunch of reasons. In the United States, James Madison drafted our Constitution and designed our government by design to move slowly, so that lots of people have to agree at the same time for anything to really change. Private industry is motivated completely by different forces. The free market, pushes innovation and quick change. And so in a situation like this, what you're seeing the government try to do is change the way it does business as fast as it can. So it's coming more in line with, because of an emergent need, the way that private sector is motivated. So you're seeing, FDA starting to short circuit some of their requirements so that you can quickly get new pharmaceuticals tested. You're seeing procurement rules relaxed so that we can quickly get funding out to people who can do things more quickly. So usually the big difference on one side in government versus private sector is the speed of the ability to move and the agility. But I'm thankful to see our government now at all levels starting to really speed that up using the the legal instruments that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a future discussion to be had, a post-mortem kind of discussion around did we move fast enough or not. But I do think it's really important to recognize at all levels of government, things are moving a whole lot faster than they normally do right now. So that in itself is at least an improvement. And the fact that we have these funding opportunities and things that Emil mentioned, already available, is proof of that. So fantastic.
Tom, I do believe that this is Emil. I believe that a social hour would perhaps be the best lubricant for that conversation.
Yeah.
We're done with this.
Than that on this call. Yep.
It is interesting though. Just one more comment, Tom, to that point. When this is a global problem, of course. So I don't mean to minimize that. But looking at Americans, when Americans are challenged with a threat like this, whether it's a perceived threat from the Soviet Union in the Cold War, we respond with an Apollo program, or the threat from Nazi Germany, a Manhattan Project. And you've seen those sorts of words being put around in the press. We need an Apollo program, a Manhattan program for how to supercharge response and recovery to new pandemic threats. So I'm an optimist, and I think there are no more creative and innovative people in the world than Americans when we put our minds to things. So I am confident that a lot of the things we're starting to get moving are going to change the game. I'm an optimist.
I completely agree with you, Steve, and I appreciate that comment. And in fact, at RIoT, we have a motto that we use internally in any cases, not just situations like this, where we say, you need a bias towards action. It's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it. And so, it's great to have folks like you showing that leadership and that optimism, because when the back is against the wall, as Americans, we have always been able to respond. It is, before I move on, anyone else want to add anything to that particular comment from the rest of the panel?
I would love to add something to that, Tom. It's quite interesting that And it's ironic that this is a time that we're all quarantined, we're all in isolation, we're all at home, but it actually is a time for us to come together as a nation and globally to look at our technology, to look at our innovation and say, how can we pull it all together to solve this as a collection and as a collective. So I appreciate, Steve, that you saying you're an optimist and that we do have the smarts and the innovation in this nation and in the triangle for us to be able to collectively work together during a time that's actually isolating us physically, which is quite interesting.
I agree, and if I could just add, we don't have to necessarily innovate and create to move forward. There are other nations across this world that have mitigated better and have prepared better. You take Singapore and you take their national EHR system and how they were able to connect a knowledge base from the top to an active base on the ground and leverage data and leverage systems that were built over the last 5 to 10 years to harmonize and unify data streams. This is in a lot of respects cultural and process oriented as much as anything, less technology. Our technology at this point can pretty much do anything we want it to do. It's a matter of how we orient our people and our processes to drive change. And so I look at this with extreme optimism, but I also want to caveat that we don't have to necessarily create as much as learn in some cases.
So I want to follow up on that, Michael, because I think it's a really important point that you're making, and you spoke before about how this drives cultural change. We had a conversation the other day as we were preparing for this panel where you brought up the importance to not just think about the physical health and the communicativeness of the disease. I don't know if communicativeness is a word, but I think you get the idea there. But really, a lot about health as well, right?
I'm sorry, you said what?
A lot of this is also around mental health, right? It's around changing our routines and getting comfortable with that, and maybe being closer to the people that we love more of the time than we're normally close to them. Talk about a little bit about what do you see in that space, and what are innovators and entrepreneurs doing to address this cultural change?
Yeah, I mean, you look at big data, and we talk a lot about big data, but I want to focus us on small data, what's going on inside of our bodies, and how disease manifests. We haven't been a system that historically has focused on sickness and disease, not wellness and health. And when you look at the inherent systems inside of our body, we're looking at the gut and the brain as the really core action of disease and illness. And so specifically stress drives cortisol levels. Prolonged stress drives inflammation and drives down your lymphocytes, which inhibits your ability to attack infection. And so when you look at the connection between the mind and the gut, you can also go further in respects to how the microbiome reacts to the certain foods you eat, and how that it will inhibit the production of serotonin neurons, which will drive your long-term happiness. And so we have this incredible system inside of ourselves that we don't educate, and we're not driving a level of awareness around how we ourselves individually can affect disease and can affect illness. And in this moment of time, actually is within our control right now to focus on more than ever. And so, I would love a level of energy and effort, and we're seeing this from entrepreneurial digital platforms like Headspace and Calm and others that are opening up their services so that we can focus on self healing and mental wellness. But when we look at the healthcare equation of an individual, Tom, the determinants of health, what data drives our health, only 11% of the health of an individual is driven by the access to medical care, right? So 89% of it is driven by the behavior, the social, environmental, and genetic code that an individual, orients themselves to. So when we think about, both fighting this pandemic and mitigating, our susceptibility to infection and our susceptibility to, death, we have some controls. And then after this pandemic, when we think about chronic disease and cancer, I mean, this is about fighting small data as much as it is about utilizing big data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. This is another one of those force multipliers, like we talked about in the first panel, that it's not just the disease itself, but all of these other complicating factors. Stress is a huge one, right? So, Manal, I'll come over to you. As you think about disseminating information, it's really, really important that that information is up to date, that it's real time, that it's accurate. Talk a little bit about how do you do that? How do you make sure that, the information, say, that you're providing on an enterprise scale is the latest, most important, most up to date? Because when we have that kind of trust, it can greatly reduce things like stress.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It was interesting because I was sort of reflecting on, taking what was just said and saying, what's a corporate responsibility for their employees, for their customers, and for the community that they touch. And it really is reinforcing messages of safety, of security, of health, of good being and well-being, which is what we were just suggesting. If we look at the micro, it's all about our individual. So really, at the end of the day, what and how you're communicating to all your stakeholders is critical. And with NewsCo, just going now to the granular and our tactical way of doing it, we use AI, and AI that allows you to curate information based on mood, based on topic, based on real time, based on information that's relevant to the person that you're speaking to. And AI is great, but there's a lot of but technology is still not there that you fully, can depend on AI unless it's from a source that you're fully that you fully trust. So there is a process that the human touch comes in as well. So it's curated with AI to optimize and make a more efficient process, but the human touch to say, yes, this is the type of messaging that I want to send to my employees about what's going on, to give them the reassurance and the confidence in my organization and in the environment as a whole.
Thank you. I have a question I want to ask Steve in a moment around AI, but first, Emil, I'd like to go over to you before we leave this topic of kind of mental health and cultural change and other kinds of things. Are you seeing, as folks are seeking to support solutions and research and vaccines, are you seeing that more social side as well being driven, or really is the focus right now squarely on what I'll call quote unquote medical?
So for BARDA's funding purposes, they are going to be entirely focused on national health security issues. So that's where their impetus happens to lie. However, there happen to be a number of one of the beautiful things about the Triangle and North Carolina in general is our ecosystem, as we've discussed, the optimism, the can-do spirit that we happen to have here. North Carolina Biotech, NC Biotech, has gone ahead and created a COVID-19 site. So if you are looking for, say, opportunities in some of those areas, I would highly recommend hitting the NC Biotech site. Eva Garland Consulting, which happens to be a grant writing firm in the nationally focused, but based here in Raleigh, has also captured funding opportunities on their website. And our one of the collaborators with First Flight is the North Carolina Military Business Center, the DefTech community, which is specifically focusing on the defense community. So if you hit deftech.nc.gov, you can see what the opportunities happen to be there. So, and again, for my purposes, as we're thinking about entrepreneurs, as we're thinking about this ecosystem, oftentimes we've got entrepreneurs who are looking for funding opportunities to go ahead and see how can they go ahead and actually move this forward. And so those are some ways that we're able to go ahead and highlight to be able to go ahead and create a path forward so that folks are able to do well by doing good and leaning in to go ahead and help tackle COVID-19.
Fantastic, thanks. And we'll follow up with all of our panelists to get these other resources like the site that you just mentioned with NC Biotech and others, and see that we can try and publish out as much of that as we can, and point people to each of the resources that you've identified. So thank you for bringing some of that forward. Steve, I'm going to ask one last question to you, and then we'll open to take a few audience questions. I've heard a number of times, I believe that the SAS founder talking about, Jim Goodnight talking about, our artificial intelligence, is this a real thing, or is it really all just math and analytics? And that's not the debate that I want to have here today. But as we think about big data analytics, I was speaking to a researcher at NC State yesterday, actually, who's not involved in healthcare at all, but is a really, really sharp analytics person. And we exchanged a couple of notes back and forth, and he was trying to understand, how do I bring my analytics prowess to a new application? How often in SaaS do you see that work that you're doing maybe for clients in completely different verticals, where you learn things that have insights that drive into a situation, whether it's recovery response or whether it's prediction of things like pandemics?
Oh, it happens all the time. And just as an example, we have a center of excellence at SAS that focuses on operations research, kind of the classical disciplines where you talk about how do you optimize limited resources. You've got limited people, limited time, limited money, or limited materials, which is, at least in my world, pretty much every government problem there is. And how do we optimize those? Well, now we can take some of those same tools and we can tell that center of excellence, hey, let's stop working on whatever you're doing and let's work on optimizing hospital bed usage in Germany, or optimizing ICU beds in Spain. So we can take a lot of those same engines and kind of turn them towards different problems. Now, some of the input data may be different, the domain and assumptions might be different, constraints might be different, but the engines and the ability to work with that stuff really does translate around quite well. And that's certainly true in artificial intelligence as well. One of the hallmarks of AI is its flexibility at taking multiple disparate sorts of data, being able to integrate that data together and help produce recognized patterns or directions that you might choose to go forward that you might not have seen other ways. And so those tools are quite flexible, and we're seeing a lot of opportunity to try to transition those into helping get in the fight against COVID-19.
It's fantastic. These systems are all really interconnected, and I think as you answered that, it really just drives home that, yeah, there are a lot of similar approaches, but the interrelated systems, you can apply things from one space to another space, but nothing really happens completely independently.
Mm-hmm.
So Caroline, I think we have some questions from the audience. Is that correct?
Hey, Tom, we have one question from Dennis. Can the panel briefly talk about potential immediate solutions, how technology and data can help combat the current pandemic?
Anyone want to take a stab at that? Steve, maybe you can talk, because I know that SAS is doing things already. Maybe you have an answer to get us started?
Sure. Now, the good news is there are things we can do immediately, and I think all of us, probably everybody on this call, you're working in wherever your areas of expertise are to try to do things as fast as we can. But so that's the good news. The tough news is that it's kind of like a rising tide. It's hard to get sandbags in place fast enough to stop all of it. So on the positive side of that, though, we are the first thing you want to do with data. Many of our partners in government or health, what's going on and where. So simple dashboards and situational awareness. That's kind of the easiest end of what we call analytics. We talk about AI and stuff on the other end, but just sometimes getting a good map with not just the health data in the cases, we see those online all the time, but what about supply chain data and my personnel and all that other stuff layered onto that so I can see where my risks are. Those are things that help government and healthcare organizations make decisions quickly. Where do I need to shift resources like doctors and nurses? So immediate term is just taking the data, the state of play, and getting that in front of decision makers so they can work more quickly. So that's really the kind of the immediate need that we see, and one of the ways we can act immediately. On the pharmaceutical side, I know we're talking about response. It is how can we bring all this information together to quickly fast track and test clinical trials of effectiveness of new drugs. You see in the news, there's a drug that's very old for malaria that may have activity against coronavirus. You saw it in the news yesterday. And so how quickly can we use technology to share that clinical trial data and get to the point where we understand if that signal is real or not? So that's what we're doing in the near term, but it's going to be a long haul no matter what we do.
Yeah, no, appreciate
this
that.
is Emil.
Yeah, Emil, go
This
ahead.
is Emil. You mind if I chime in?
Yeah.
I'll be perfectly honest with you. One of the cool things about the position I'm in right now is just hearing from different folks across this region as to what it is they're either have been working on or currently working on or looking to work on to go ahead and help tackle this and other national health security issues. You know, companies that have molecules that might have relevance to MERS, which could possibly have relevance to COVID-19, other entities that are, and so what I'm trying to specifically do is, as folks basically raise their hands and say, hey, this is what I've got, then trying to go ahead and see how we can best match them to the funding opportunities that might be out there, or the best, basically the best lane, so that they're able to go ahead and take action on the solutions that they happen to have. So the research triangle happens to be in the top 5 in the nation in terms of national health security, basically concentration. So this is a phenomenal region to go ahead and help actually tackle these pandemic problems. So that for me has been a tremendously encouraging thing. And so being able to play a small role in that in terms of plugging people in is just, it's been awesome.
That's great. Likewise, I think we're excited to see the energy, to see the creativity. I'll add an answer to this question as well in terms of something that if you are an entrepreneur and you have an idea, or if you're a corporation thinking to do something completely new, like the distillery over in, I believe it's over in Chapel Hill, that decided to use all the distilling equipment to start making hand sanitizer instead of bourbons and scotches. If you have something creative and new that you're interested in but need help, apply to the RIoT Accelerator. We're accepting applications right now. Normally, if you're a corporate entity working on a project through our team, there's a fee for that. But if you're working on something that's related to this health epidemic, we'll waive that fee, bring you into the program. If you're a startup working on something, our programs are completely free. We would love to help accelerate and scale things, very quickly. So RIoT as well, reach out to us. If we're not the right resource to help you, we're very well connected, and they'll try and help connect people into others in the community. The other, maybe the second part to the answer, what can you do immediately, is what everyone has heard already. Practice good social distancing, wash your hands, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to rehash that whole list, but it's really critically important that we're all just smart as individuals. Any other questions online, Caroline?
Hi, Tom. There's one more from Chopra. What can our local innovators do to help address the challenges our community faces with COVID-19?
Michael, do you want to try and take a stab at that?
Obviously that's a broad question, but I think, I just sent a call to action from the White House that's asking for the tech community to support, analysis, machine learning, any type of advanced analytic, support on an open data set of 30,000 published articles, full text articles, et cetera. You're going to see this increasingly, and it's a good thing, which is more open data sets. And then the question becomes, okay, what do you do with it, and how do you deploy it? So I think it just really kind of reiterates, Tom, what you shared, which is, and Emil shared, which is, look, we're at the very beginning of this. We're the ones that we have energy, we have innovative entrepreneurial spirit. Let's wake up every day, look at what's out there, and figure out how to distill it down to purpose and value, and deploy it through the channels that exist here. Obviously, DHIT, RIoT, First Flight. We are associations that have multi-channel reach. So I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's about activating your talents on the open data sets and open information sets that exist, and then bringing us a level of concept or product that we can then help you mature fast and get to market.
Yeah, thanks. And Michael's contact information is here on the slide, but any that have some idea that the DHIT or others in the area can help with, we'll make sure to help direct and get those over to those right supporters. I will hint, I can't reveal yet, but RIoT's working on something new that we hope we'll be able to announce next week that also will be a way to engage the entrepreneurial community. So stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have, I think, a really big announcement. If you're a corporate sponsor interested in learning more ahead of time, particularly if you're interested to help fund a new activity that we're doing around this space, feel free to reach out sooner. We'd love to talk with you. We're at the end of our time. I want to ask the same question of this panel that I did to the other, which is that, despite that we have a Herculean challenge in front of us right now, things are going to get better. And I'm really interested to hear from each of you, what are you quite optimistic about in terms of either things that are happening now or the potential that technology and data will bring towards our recovery from a situation like this? Manal, we'll start with you, please.
Okay, that's fantastic. For me, I actually was thinking of that response for the first panel, is that everything is starting to become more human-centric. We talked about emotional wellness earlier during this discussion, and how I think we're all going to take personal responsibility for our emotional wellness and those around us, and really focusing, rather than buying into the fear and scarcity that's prevalent, is really looking into hope and innovation and just really feeling safe and secure. And if we can do that on an individual basis, we do that on a family basis, and we do that in a corporate basis, with knowing that, at Newsco, with our that startup, that we know that we're making an impact, whether it's a small part of the chain with communication and helping them with communication, or corporations, but we do that and make our part in making the world a better place. So it's a bit of a large type of emotional response mingled with technology, but that's what I'm excited about.
Great, thank you very much. Michael, what are you optimistic about?
Yeah, well, I'll echo that sentiment, and then add and piggyback on a level of public infrastructure or public utility that we support as a community across the country and across North Carolina, that frees our data, that applies a new infrastructure and economic narrative to our data streams, much like energy, gas, electricity. Our healthcare data is should be freed and not monopolized and commercialized as it is, because it is proven right now that is one of the major barriers to social well-being. So I look at the level again. I'll talk about culture being, the driving force here. We're going to have some changes, and I'm optimistic that the people that are on this call and kind of align across this country are going to push for more public utility around healthcare data.
Yeah, the healthcare data as a utility, that's a really interesting concept. That might be a great topic for a future discussion. So thank you for that. Emil, let's go.
To plug DHIT very quickly, if we have a white paper that we produced called the Community Hug. It's an initiative that we're trying to pass at the state level, as well as seek institutional supporters and local communities. But it is essentially creating a health utility grid at the local level, utilizing the public library as the custodian of data and a community-based infrastructure to orient a single health record for our communities, so that we can reorient this system from top down to bottom up.
Thanks. We'll make sure to get that from you and distribute it across our entire ecosystem. Emil, let's move over to you. What are you optimistic about?
Thanks, Tom. I think COVID-19 reminds us of the importance of looking at the science and technology problems and solutions that are facing society. And what I'm optimistic about is that innovation, entrepreneurship, and optimism are key components of America's competitive advantage. And while there are tremendous opportunities, there are also tremendous challenges. There are tremendous opportunities for us to go ahead and tackle not only COVID-19, but other massive problems that we have moving forward, as was touched on earlier in regards to things like the Manhattan Project, and other big challenges that we've taken on. We've managed to do that historically. We will continue to do that with this, and that will continue to give me hope. I know we can do this, and I'm tremendously optimistic about tackling this.
Yeah, thank you. That's really the call to action for all entrepreneurs. There's huge opportunity now to not do something that's incredibly meaningful and good, but quite honestly, there's huge business opportunity behind that as well. So great. Steve, you already proclaimed yourself an optimist earlier in the conversation, so let's close it out with you.
Well, I've left myself nowhere to go, I guess. Well, hey, I'm optimistic about speed to treatment. I think that this idea of an Apollo program for vaccine development and scaling is really where my optimism is. We should be able to go from novel disease to vaccine much faster than we can now, and I think this event provides the motivation to get that funding going to do it. We're going to see more and more of these zoonotic diseases jumping from animals to humans as we continue to grow in population and ecosystems collide. So because of that reason, I think we're going to need it, and I'm optimistic we can do it.
Thank you very much. As I told the last panel, unfortunately, we don't get the audio of a round of applause, but very thankful that you were each able to share your perspectives today. This has been a fantastic conversation. As I said before, we're going to publish this out. We'll do a little bit of editing to make sure that it's succinct and clear, but we'll publish this out via the RIoT Underground podcast. You can find that podcast anywhere that you download your podcast today, whether that's Spotify or the iTunes Store or Google Podcast, etc. I believe that a link has been posted in the chat window for folks that are online. We would love if you would spend 2 minutes and give a quick survey on this to give some feedback on this event, this format, how we can improve it going forward. We are going to launch a regular series for at least as long as everyone is stuck working from home. We think it's important to be able to bring community together, to have open discussions together, to ask questions. So please participate in that. If you're not logged in, we'll email that out to the registrants as well. But again, a thank you to all of our speakers today. A thanks to the audience for participating. And I can't wait to hear what great ideas come out of this community and how we and also this incredible range of sponsors can support you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
All right. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you again soon.